Okay, we can start. All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming today. My name is Suvendrini Kakuchi. I will be your moderator today. We have with here two very distinguished guests. On my far right, of course, is the interpreter, but next to her we have our speaker, Miss Mutoh Ruiko, who is from Fukushima. And next to her, we have Mr. Kaido, Yuhichi, who is a very famous lawyer and will be appearing for the plaintiffs. I think it's 6,000 now, 6,000 plaintiffs suing TEPCO for not responding correctly during a nuclear accident. This is a groundbreaking lawsuit because it's the first time citizens are taking TEPCO to court. And we will hear the details today. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
皆さんこんにちは。福島原発告訴団団長の武藤瑠衣子と申します。
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mutoh Ruiko, and I'm the representative of the Fukushima nuclear disaster plaintiffs.
福島原発告訴団は2012年の3月に福島県で結成されました。2011年3月11日の原発事故から1年が経っても事故の責任が明らかにされず、誰も処罰されない現状があったからです。
So we formed the Fukushima nuclear disaster plaintiffs organization in March of 2012 in Fukushima prefecture. This was because 1 year after the disaster of March 11, 2011, the responsibility of the nuclear accident was still not being held to account, and there was no punishment and no legal responsibility pursued at that stage.
事故の被害は甚大です。 16万人が家を追われ、職業を失い、家族や地域社会がバラバラにされました。原発のサイト内で職員が亡くなり、双葉病院では避難中に50人の高齢者が亡くなりました。自殺者もいます。家畜や動物たちも命を落としました。子どもたちは外で遊べなくなりました。山林や田畑、居住地も広大に汚染されました。 食べ物に放射性物質が検出されました。人々は健康被害に怯えて暮らす人生となりました。
The damage and the effects caused by the disaster have been expansive. 160,000 people have been forced to flee from their homes. They have lost their jobs. Communities and families have been separated. On the location of the nuclear power plant itself, there have been deaths of workers there. And at the Futaba hospital near the nuclear power plant, 50 elderly people who were being evacuated also passed away. There have also been many cases of suicides, and many animals and livestock have also lost their lives. Children are no longer able to play outside. As well as this, the mountains and the agricultural fields and the residential areas have all been hugely contaminated. There have been radioactive materials detected in food, and people are forced to live in the fear of damage to their health within their everyday lives.
2011年度、2012年度までの18歳以下の甲状腺検査の結果、約23万人中59人が甲状腺がん、またはがんの疑いとなっています。福島県県民健康調査では、 原発事故による放射能との関係はないと断定していますが、明らかな多発として原因を調べるべきだと主張する学者もいます。
In the thyroid tests which were conducted on people under the age of 18 in 2011 and 2012, of 230,000 children who were tested, 59 have been found to have either thyroid cancer or potential likelihood of such cancer. According to the Fukushima Prefectural Health Survey, it's been one way declared that these kind of health effects are unrelated to the radiation caused by the nuclear disaster. However, this clear increase in the frequency is something that many more scholars and experts are starting to say that we need to look at the causes and the facts behind this more.
原発事故の被害は今も拡大しています。
And the effects of this disaster are continuing to expand even today.
原子炉からは今も1時間に1000万ベクレルの放射性物質が大気中に放出されています。原発建屋海側の観測井戸から検出される放射性物質の濃度は日々上がり続けています。原発サイト内では1日3000人の作業員が高い線量の中で働いています。問題の汚染水を浴びることさえあります。多重化した下請け構造のために正当な対価を受け取れない作業員も多くいます。作業員の半数以上は福島県民です。事故により仕事を失ったために原発で働く人も多くいます。
And amongst these expanding effects of the nuclear disaster include, of course, the fact that even now, every hour, there are 10 million becquerels of radioactive materials being released into the atmosphere from the reactor at the plant. The concentration of the radioactive materials which have been detected within the ocean side of the reactor building and the monitoring wells within there are continuing to increase every day. Within the site of the nuclear reactor, every day there are 3,000 workers forced to be working amongst conditions of very high levels of radiation. And because of also the complicated structure of the contractors who are working there, this is also meaning that there are some people who are not even receiving the full kind of treatment or also financial compensation and so on that they should be received. Some of them are even forced to actually come into contact with the issue of or the contaminated water, which is at issue today. More than half of the workers working at the Fukushima nuclear power plant are citizens from Fukushima prefecture. And they are working here at the plant because, having lost their jobs and their livelihoods after the disaster, they have no other choice for where to be working.
除染もまた原発で設けたゼネコン会社が利権を獲得し、多くの福島県民が作業員となっています。あまり効果の期待できない除染で出た膨大な放射性の廃棄物は、黒や青い色のフレコンバッグに詰め込まれ、耕作できない田んぼに積み上げられ、あるいは家の敷地の中に置かれたり、庭に埋められたりしています。フレコンバッグに放射線の測定器を近づけると、周囲の10倍ぐらいの線量になります。
The issue of the decontamination efforts in the area is also of great concern. In order to gain their various interests and profits and so on, there are many Fukushima citizens who are working in these large construction contractors who have been contracted to work at the nuclear power plant. And despite the fact that the deconstruction efforts have shown at this stage not to have any great effect on reducing the levels of radioactivity in the area, these materials are being gathered together in these black and blue bags that we see, and gathered together and piled up in the middle of these rice fields, which are now no longer able to actually be harvested, or else even on the grounds of the homes of general citizens or in the gardens. But however, when you go towards these container bags and so on and measure the radiation levels around there, it's 10 times as high as the surrounding areas.
このような被害があるのに、加害者の責任が問われないのはどう考えてもおかしなことです。昨年6月に福島県民1324人が東京電力の幹部や経産省の役人など33人を刑事告訴しました。その後、全国に告訴告発人を募り、合わせて14,716人の大告訴団となりました。
However, despite the fact that there are such grave and expanded damages occurring even now, when we think about the fact that those responsible for this are not being taken into account, this is a situation which is just unthinkable. In order to deal with this, actually, we have been working since last year in June, when 1,324 citizens from Fukushima prefecture lodged criminal complaints against officials of TEPCO and also officials from the METI ministry. And after this, we called from people all around Japan to join this group of complainants, and now we have been able to reach a large amount of plaintiffs working in this suit of 14,716 people working together as plaintiffs.
この告訴は今年の9月9日に全員が不起訴となりました。福島地検がこの事件を東京地検に移送したために、処分は東京地検が出しました。そのため 一般有権者によって開かれる検察審査会への申し立てが福島ではなく東京でしかできなくなりました。福島県民による判断を避けるためだとしか思えません。
However, on September 9th of this year, each of these cases came with the result of being not prosecuted. At the time of this, actually, the Fukushima District Court moved this case to the Tokyo District Court. And because of this shift, the order for dismissal... prosecutor's office. Sorry. Thank you. And so this was moved from the prosecutor's office in Tokyo. And after this, this meant that because the people were not able to take the court to the proceedings in Fukushima, but had to be done to the Committee for Inquest of Prosecution in Tokyo, which was something which was done really to remove the people of Fukushima from being able to make their own judgment and action in this plan.
今年の10月16日と11月22日に5740人が東京検察審査会に申し立てを行いました。現在東京検察審査会第5審査会が検察の処分が妥当なのかを審査しています。
And on the 16th of October this year, and also the 22nd of November, a total of 5,740 people took this to the Committee for the Inquest and the Tokyo prosecutions. At the moment, this is being conducted through the 5th Committee in the Tokyo Prosecution Court, and they are now discussing whether the dismissal which was given by the prosecution was indeed suitable or not, or acceptable or not.
それに並行して私たちは今年の9月3日に東京電力を公害罪で告発しました。これは汚染水放出事件に対する告発です。後で弁護士から詳しく説明がありますが、予測された汚染水の漏洩に対して東京電力が対策を取らなかったことが原因の事件です。
And at the same time as this, we have also launched an action as of September the 3rd this year, taking TEPCO, or a complaint against TEPCO for breaking the Act for the Punishment of Environmental Pollution Crimes Relating to Human Health. This complaint is in regards to the issue of the contaminated water. And after this, we will hear a much more detailed explanation of this court from our lawyer who is here. But this is basically... we are looking at the fact that TEPCO did not take measures about the contaminated water, despite the fact that this leakage had been predicted and known.
もともと福島原発は地下水が大量に流れ込む立地にあり、事故前から地下水を井戸で汲み上げて建屋にかかる浮力を逃していました。地下水が建屋に流れ込み、汚染水となって海に漏れ出すことは予測できたことです。また、汲み上げた汚染水のタンクは応急的なものであり、メーカーが品質を保証していなかったにもかかわらず、漏洩が起きるまで2年半も使い続けていました。
So the location of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant is actually on land where there is great amounts of groundwater flowing through the area originally. And because of this, even before the disaster, because of the pumpage that was going from the groundwater into the well within the reactor building, it could have been seen that actually there was this potential or risk for the contaminated water or for groundwater to be coming within the reactor building, becoming contaminated water, and then being leaked into the ocean. So this is something that TEPCO could have predicted. At the same time, the tanks which were used to store this contaminated water, which was pumped up, were only temporary tanks which were being used. And so they were not actually, the quality of these tanks was not being guaranteed by the makers of the tanks at the time. However, despite this fact, these tanks were continued to use for 2.5 years, knowing this fact, until this leakage has become so severe as it is now.
原発事故の前も高い津波の試算をし、予測をしていましたが、対策を取りませんでした。事故の後も東京電力の体質は全く変わっていません。汚染水の漏洩によりサイト内で働く作業員はさらに大量の被曝を強いられています。実際に汚染水を浴びる事故も起きています。雨が降るたびにタンクの積の汚染が外洋につながる側溝に流れ込みます。
Even before the disaster, there was this predictions or estimations were in place about what could have or what would perhaps happen if there was a high-level tsunami. However, measures were not put in place to actually deal with what would happen if this was really to become a reality. At the same time, the attitude and the measures of TEPCO have not changed even after this huge disaster has occurred. As a result of the leakage of the contaminated water, the workers who are working within the site at Fukushima are forced to be exposed to extremely high levels of radiation. And there are even cases or incidents where they are being directly exposed or directly in contact with this contaminated water. At the same time, every time it's raining in the area, there is leakage or flowing of this contaminated water into the external ocean through the rear entrance of the tanks.
今年の夏にいくつかの海水浴場が解禁となり、子どもたちが泳ぎました。その最中に発覚した放出事件でした。海への大量放出は漁業者たちに大きな影響を与えます。また世界の命の源である海の汚染は深刻な問題です。
This past summer, many of the ocean swimming beaches in the area were actually reopened, and there are so many children swimming in these areas. And yet it was amongst this very time, which is when these huge leakages of the water was really found out. At the same time, the huge amounts of leakage of radioactive contaminated water into the ocean is having a huge impact on the local fishermen, and also, of course, on the ocean, which provides the very source of all life for people around the world. And this is such a serious issue.
東京電力がお金を惜しまずに早い段階で対策を講じていれば、ここまで手に負えない状態にはならなかったと思います。これは犯罪的な行為だと思います。明日、福島原発告訴団は第2次告発を福島県警に行います。6042人が委任状を送ってくれました。それを提出に行きます。ぜひ取材をお願いいたします。
So if TEPCO had not been concerned with financial considerations, but had at an early stage taken the required measures, then this situation would not have become as serious as it is today. And I believe that this is a criminal act. Tomorrow, on behalf of the Fukushima nuclear disaster plaintiffs, we will be taking the second stage of complaints to the Fukushima prefectural police. And this includes complaints on behalf of 6,042 people who submitted them as part of our action. We will be directly submitting these tomorrow and hope that some of you can join to cover this action also.
もう一つお知らせしたいことがあります。これは今年の8月に出版したこれでも罪は問えないのですかという本です。検察に最初に告訴した時の陳述書です。自分が受けた被害を綴った7000通の陳述書の中から福島県民50人を選んで許諾を得て出版したものです。7歳の少年から88歳の女性までさまざまな職業、そしてさまざまな立場の人がこの陳述書を書いています。これを読んでいただけると、原発事故というものが私たちから何を奪っていったか、そして何をもたらしたかがわかると思います。今日数冊持ってきておりますので、よかったらぜひお求めください。ありがとうございました。
And finally, I have one announcement which I would like to share. This book, which I was demonstrating, was published in August of this year under a title, on behalf of the Fukushima nuclear disaster plaintiffs, on the title, well, even now are these crimes not being taken into account. And this book comprises of the actual accusations which were brought to the prosecutors at the first stage of our action. There were 7,000 people or letters which were sent in with these accusations, and from them we selected 50 which were written by citizens of Fukushima Prefecture, and with their permission we published them in the form of this book. They include accounts written by a young boy of 7 years old through to a woman of 88 years old, people from various locations, occupations, backgrounds, and positions also. We've also brought a short translation of 3 of these with us today in English. And this really shows also what it was that this nuclear disaster has taken away from us, or from we the people, and what it's actually brought to our situation now as well. I have some copies of the book with me today also, so if anyone is interested, please approach me afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mutoh. And now Mr. Kaido.
My name is Yuhichi Kaido. I'm attorney for Fukushima Nuclear Disaster Plaintiffs. We have two cases. I will explain now today about the second case. The flow of the groundwater was known from the time of construction of a nuclear power plant. From the time of construction, there was groundwater discharge, and the system to pump groundwater and release into the ocean was made. Since immediately after the disaster in March 2011, groundwater was flowing into the reactor building, becoming contaminated. It was made public from around April 2nd that there were leaks of highly contaminated water from the reactor 2 pit into the ocean. After the Fukushima nuclear disaster, the government directed TEPCO to consider construction of the underground boundary, and TEPCO presented a plan to government on June 13, 2011. Here, TEPCO put forward concrete plan, including diagrams and the following statement: to prevent further contamination of the ocean, we will take full measure to stop the groundwater. We will construct a boundary wall around the reactor building, first and fourth, and the turbine buildings. The boundary will basically be slurry, reaching the depths of the low permeable layer. However, TEPCO also stated that in other documents that although the budget to deal with the issue was not yet confirmed, depending on the plan, it could be in the level of 100 billion. TEPCO then obstructed the announcement of its own plan by the government, stating that if it was necessary to go into debt on the level of 100 billion, there would be a high risk of being severely criticized by the market of being one step closer or moving into the direction of the insolvency, and that this should be avoided. At the end of the August 2013, the amount of the contaminated water within the site of the Fukushima nuclear power plant is approximately 400,000 tons. Of this, approximately 90,000 tons is within the reactor buildings, and approximately 300,000 tons is said to be stored within the tanks. On August 28th, the Nuclear Regulation Authority decided to increase the INES rating in regard to this contaminated water leakage to level 3, a serious incident. There are two of contaminated water released into the ocean. One is a high-level contaminated water leaked from the tank into the environment. Two, groundwater was seeped into the buildings, come into the contact with melted fuel, and being released into the ocean. It is difficult to estimate how much of the contaminated water was released through which route. However, even the huge amount of the contaminated water stored in the tanks was originally groundwater, which came through the cooling route and was pumped in. Thus, in order to stop a huge increase of the contaminated water, the urgent task is to stop the flow of the groundwater into the reactor building's basement. Method to prevent leakage from tanks and pipes. This tank was temporary, emergency tank, not welded. Lifetime tank said to be several years. Only way to prevent leakage from tanks and pipes is to change this to something permanent as soon as possible. But this task was not done by the TEPCO. Cause for leakage from tanks: one, non-compliance with responsibility of early renewal system. Two, lax monitoring. Three, drain valves had been left open. The groundwater too. It is thought that since the disaster until now, contaminated water has been continually released into the ocean through groundwater. TEPCO has publicly announced that since May 2011, up to 20 trillion becquerel of cesium 137 and 10 trillion becquerel of strontium have been released into the ocean. Strontium accumulates in the bones and can be a cause of cancers, including leukemia. The main reason for such high amount of non-manageable contaminated water is that underground boundary was not constructed. This is the entrance of the groundwater into reactor building's basement. This is the photograph of the contaminated water broadcast by the Fuji TV. This is a government proposal for frozen wall. I have strong doubt to the frozen wall was feasible to stop the contamination. And boundary wall is no longer enough to prevent expansion of contaminated water. This is because the possibility of tank leakage coming through cracks in tank's foundation and seeping into underground, coming into contact with groundwater. It is necessary to confirm whether such route of contamination occurred. NRS expert conference pointed out on August 21st the risk of some contaminated water mixing with groundwater. Monitoring data indicating this has also been shown. If permeating from the tanks to groundwater, boundary alone will not be enough to prevent the release of contaminated groundwater. Budget for renewal of tanks and pipes is not included within the government measures, and it is still being left up to TEPCO. Thus, the risk of further expansion of the contamination is unavoidable. The international community is demonstrating deep concern since the increase to level 3. Failure to deal with the situation could lead to the loss of the international trust in Japan. The Japanese government should deeply recognize this extremely serious situation. And clarifying TEPCO's criminal liability will allow progress towards correct measures. In relation to the release of the contaminated water into the environment at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, a complaint was submitted on the September 3, as Mutoh said. And now the Fukushima police admit our complaint. And according to the shortage of the time, we should skip. There are 2 points the TEPCO's liability. First liability, continued to build tanks knowing that they would leak. Continued to responsibly build tanks for which they cannot be brought to account under defect liability, product liability. Large tanks able to accumulate large amounts of contaminated water should have been installed. Monitoring of tanks was also neglected. And second liability, failure to begin construction of boundary in June 2011. This is the most important point. If construction to surround the reactor building with slurry wall or clay wall had been started immediately after the accident, release of contaminated water into ocean could have been prevented. Delay of the making plan public and neglect to progress plan was in order to prevent TEPCO's capital deficit for management reason. This very, very strong responsibility. Prioritization of economic concern shows that this was indeed clearly an environmental pollution crime which caused contamination of the environment. Conclusion. TEPCO has severe responsibility about this accident and leakage of the contaminated water. I think that clarifying the responsibility of TEPCO will become the starting point for Japanese nuclear and whole energy policy. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. The floor is open for questions. Edwin first, yes.
Edwin Carmiel, freelance. What is the amount of the donated money and what is done with it? Did the survivors of Fukushima receive compensation, or will the rest go to the Olympic Games? Thank you.
From the government compensation, you mean? Or
compensation.
Private.
その保証の問題についてなんですけれども、フリーランスのジャーナリストです。で、その福島にされたその保証金というのはどういうふうにその市民の方にちゃんと市民の手に届いているのかということ、あとはそういったような保証というのはその福島の被災者ではなく東京のオリンピックの方で使われてしまうようなこともあるのかということについてなんですけど。難しい質問。
説明します。はい。ちょっと難しいご質問ですが、保証金は、現在東京電力が、その請求のあった、被害者に対して、支払っています。でこれは直接の交渉で支払う場合と、あとその ADR ですね、オルタナティブ・ディスピュート・リゾリューションシステムができているんですが、それを通じて、そして、裁判はまだ判決が出ているものはほとんどありませんけれども、その3つのルートで払われています。保証金が、オリンピックに行ってしまうということは今のところはないと思いますが、でも国の税金が、もっと投じられるべきではないかというふうに我々も同じように感じています。
This is quite a difficult question, of course, but first of all, in regards to the compensation which has come directly from TEPCO for the people who were affected by the disaster in Fukushima, this has come through, there are three different main routes for there. There are those who directly made a claim to TEPCO, and there are those who have, so through direct negotiations between the citizens affected and TEPCO, being received some form of compensation from TEPCO. There are some also, there is an alternative disputes resolution mechanism which has been established, so some cases have been also resolved through this aspect. And in regards to those which are going through the process of lawsuits, there are not many cases yet which have verdicts declared for this. So at the moment, that's the situation in terms of what is given as compensation directly from TEPCO itself. In regards from the government, as far as we are aware, there are, of course, there is the issue of how citizens' tax is being used for this, and we feel very strongly that there is not enough being invested into the support for the people affected by the disaster as should be.
I have very different views from you two.
Can you identify yourself?
I'm Hiroyuki Fujita, and I'm an editorial writer at the Kokumin Shimbun, founded by Tokutomi Soho, 1890. And I have associated with some of the scientists who proclaim opposing views to the current understanding of radiation and its effect. Current understanding of radiation effects is that lower the better, higher the worse, and zero is the best. But some of the scientists oppose to that view because it's invalid. And my understanding from those scientists is that low dose radiation, around maybe let's say 100 millisievert, is not bad, but good for the health. If we based on that, our perception, based on that kind of understanding, the cleaning of the ground or the water would be unnecessary. Do you know argumentation like this exists in society, and how would you counter to those argumentation?
福島県に原発事故のすぐ後に放射線リスク健康管理アドバイザーと呼ばれる方々が来られました。でその方たちは100ミリシーベルト以下の健康被害のデータはないから大丈夫だということを言いました。しかしチェルノブイリの例などを見てみますと、低線量被爆でもたくさんの健康被害が出ているというデータがあります。でそういうことを考えると、その健康被害がないというふうに断定するということはできないと思います。これからまだ放射線による健康被害が出てくるのには時間がかかるというふうに思います。そしてたくさんの例を見てみなければわからないことだと思うので、そのないというふうに断言はできないというふうに思っています。で私たちはすでにその今出ている甲状腺検査の結果が原発事故と関係ないというふうには思えないです。はい。
In Fukushima Prefecture, following immediately after the disaster, there were, of course, scientists and experts who came to advise on the risks of radiation and also health management for the citizens. And at that time, what was largely said was dosages of around 100 millisieverts was no problem, is not something that should be of concern, is what we were told at the time. However, when we look at the data that we have from Chernobyl, for example, about the health effects which have actually been seen as a result of low-dose exposure to radiation, I believe that it is not correct to fully deny that there is any possibility of health effects from low-dose radiation. Of course, we still need more time to fully evaluate what these effects might actually be, and there is still, it's still only several years from the disaster, and this is something which will have to be very closely monitored, and will need much more further research as well. But I believe that we cannot deny that there is any risk of health effects as a result of low-dose radiation. And I believe also when we look at the results of, for example, the thyroid tests which have been conducted until now, it is difficult to think that this is totally unconnected to the situation in Fukushima.
Christoph?
Süddeutsche Zeitung, Germany, Neidhardt. I have two questions. First to the lawyer. We all know the Japanese court system is shaped so that the government can rely on it. If not on the district courts, then certainly on the Supreme Courts. All the decisions go in favor of the government. Just look at the unconstitutionality of the elections, where they don't even dare to call it invalid. Now, what do you realistically expect to achieve with that lawsuit? And the question to Ms. Mutoh, Fukushima Ken has terribly been affected by this accident, and Mr. Abe, of course, is the only one who was in favor of nuclear power before the election of 2012. Yet 4 out of 5 constituencies have voted in favor of the LDP candidate. Do you not see the connection between politics and nuclear power? Or is that, why do Fukushima people still vote for Chiminto? Thanks.
日本の裁判所が政府寄りであることは、その通りなんですけれども、少なくともこの事故に関して言いますと、TEPCO にその事前の対策を取る可能性があったということは政府の報告書にも書かれていますし、国会の報告書にも書かれていることです。ですから、もう裁判所も決してそういう見解を無視できないだろうと思います。あと今の津波対策に関することですね。それからもう一つ、この汚染水の問題に関しても、汚染水がもう漏れ出てしまったことは明らかですし、その品質保証のないタンクを立て続けていたなどということは、まともな企業ではありえないことです。ですから検察庁に常識があれば起訴されるのは当然のことではないかと私は思っています。
So in regards to your summary or evaluation of the Japanese system, of course, I believe that that is a very close representation of the situation. However, I believe in this particular case, the potential of TEPCO for taking measures to prevent this from happening is something which, even within the governmental reports and also within the diet reports, is something that was very clearly mentioned from that side as well. So considering this fact, I believe that it will be very difficult for them to ignore these facts in this particular case in regards to the measures in regards to the tsunami. And as for the contaminated water situation, it's also very clear of the situation of this leakage and the fact that this is happening on such a large scale. And when we look at the situation of the tanks with the no product liability in place there, this is something that for any regular trustworthy corporation is unthinkable in terms of the agreement there. And so thinking of this perspective, I believe that this case is something that is meaningful to pursue from these two facts.
その福島の県民にも非常に大きな被害があったというのが今回も明らかになっているんですけれども、今回の選挙の結果に関しては福島の方でも安倍さんが原発には推進しているにもかかわらず5人に4人が自民党の方に党を入れたということがあるんですけれども、その政治というもの、そして原発の政策というものをリンクとして考えていないということなのか、なぜこういったような選挙の結果になったのかというふうにぜひ武藤さんの見解を。
そうですね、福島県というところはもともと保守的なところで自民党に対する支持が圧倒的に強いところでした。そして原発事故が起きてすぐその後の対策がなかなか県民が納得いくものではなかったというのが民主党に対する批判になったのだというふうに思います。それで自民党だったらもっとその復興を早くしてくれるだろうとか対策を早くしてくれるのではないかというそういう期待があってそのような結果になったのではないかと思います。
So in regards to the question about the election results, Fukushima Prefecture is originally or traditionally a very conservative area and it has overwhelming support for the LDP very traditionally until now. So I believe that looking at the situation immediately after the disaster, people were very unhappy with the way that the DPJ was dealing with the accident. And they perhaps had the expectation that if the LDP were in power, maybe they would have acted faster or maybe they would have taken more measures immediately after. So as a result of this dissatisfaction and criticism against the DPJ, this meant that also connected to the many more support for the LDP continuing within Fukushima citizens, I believe is one analysis of the situation.
私の考え一つだけ付け加えますと、自民党の国会議員も福島の国会議員は全員福島県内の原発はすべてもう廃止するべきだというふうに選挙の時に言いました。そのこと自身がそこでですから民主党との違いはなくなっていたということもあると思います。
One point to add in regards to that issue also is at the time of the election, all of the parliamentarians from the LDP within Fukushima were actually within their election campaigns being very clear in saying that they believed that the nuclear power plants within Fukushima should be shut down. And so this meant that on terms of their policy locally in Fukushima, there was not actually a difference on this point between the LDP local politicians and the DPJ. Was one background for that also.
防衛関係の団体のワシントン特派員のようなことをしている吉川と申します。その団体の機関紙に連載したものを私もちょっと本にしたばかりでして、私立場上どちらかというと自民党ですとか自衛隊警察に近い人間なんですが、この本を書く途中のプロセスではやはり東京電力さらには日本政府のあまりのそういう情報秘匿のひどさにはもう本当私もびっくりしましたし、正直言って取材した原発に水を入れに行った消防の人たちですとか米軍の指揮官でさえはこれはもう困ったと驚いていると。でとにかくもちろん保証金を取るのも大事ですけれども、そういう東電やさらに日本政府の体質を改めさせる、これはどういうふうにしたらいいとお考えか。一つの方法としてそういう自治体職員である消防の方々、これから健康被害も出てくるかもしれないし、あと確かアメリカでも米兵の人たちの一部が訴えを出していると思うので、そういうところと協力するようなことも一つの方法なのかなと思うんですが、そこら辺お二人ともいかがでしょうか。
So I am from a security risk management organization working on defense issues and so on. In regards to my political position, I am, to say one or the other, more LDP supporter. However, in a book that we've recently published about the post-disaster management and so on, looking at the different studies and so on going through in this process, I see many concerns and issues in regards with the management by the government and also TEPCO in regards to information and so on afterwards. And also looking at, for example, the situation of those in the field who are directly involved in, the fire workers and emergency workers and so on involved in the treatment and the plant. I believe that there is something in regards to responsibility which needs to be very much looked in here. So in regards to how to make this clear, and if there's more suggestions about what kind of things that could be done in regards to this. For example, I believe that there are some cases in the United States where people who were involved in the direct post-disaster management and crisis management and so on, who are taking these court cases and so on in the United States. I wonder if cooperation with these kind of groups is something which could be considered.
損害賠償の裁判というのはいくつか行われていると思うんですけれども、私たちが行っているのはその損害賠償ではなくて刑事告訴なんですね。だから刑事罰を求めるもので責任をとにかく明らかにしてきちんと責任を取ってもらう、それが目的なんですね。でそのことによってやはりこういう企業とかそれから政府の体質というかそういうものを改めるっていうことにつながるのではないかと思っているんですね。でやっぱり被害を受けた者たちというのがに課せられる責任というものがあってですね、あると私は思っていて、それはやはりその真実を明らかにすることともう同じことを二度と繰り返させないということだと思うんですね。そのためにもきちんと責任を問いただすということが大事だというふうに思っています。それから
In regards to, there are several, of course, cases undergoing about calling for damages or compensation in regards to the acts. However, the case that we are particularly introducing today is a criminal complaint. So we are looking at making clear the responsibility or the liability in regards to this from a criminal perspective. So looking at both the corporations and the government's responsibility. And I believe that these kind of act can, or criminal complaint can very much contribute to making clear this responsibility and accountability. I believe also as those who were directly affected by the disaster, we have a responsibility to work to make these facts clear, and not only this, to prevent from such an accident ever happening again.
あとすみません、もう一つアメリカの海兵隊の方々の裁判の訴状を手に入れたところですので、これからちょっとそれも参考にさせていただきたいと思っています。
In regards of the case being brought by the U.S. Marines, we've just been or received some of the documents that they were using with this also. So we are looking at how we can maybe use this for our consideration and see what potential collaboration could maybe be considered.
Nishimura with Hokkaido Shimbun newspaper. The government of Japan has been taking the policy that all the Fukushima people should get back to their own houses, but actually they changed the policy to make them some should be go back and some cannot go back. So how have you been thinking about that former policy, and what do you think is the problem of the new policy?
はい、政府の政策に関して、しばらくですね、除染をしてそして人を介して復興するというそういう路線があったと思います。でそれは非常に一方的な政策だったというふうに思うんですね。で そこに住みたくない、もう怖いから住みたくないという人たちにとっての支援策はほとんど打ち切られていくという状況で、そういった強引な帰還政策に対しては大変問題だったと思います。でしかし今回20ミリシーベルトまでは大丈夫、までは戻す、それ以下はそれ以上は帰還させないけれども20ミリシーベルトまでは帰還しても良いというそういう基準を設けましたけれども、それに関しても非常に20ミリシーベルトは高すぎるというふうに思っています。で私たちとしてはやはり1ミリシーベルトというもともとあった基準というものを遵守していきたいというしてほしいというふうに思っています。でそれ以外結局住みたい、それから住みたくないというその人々のその選択権というものをきちんと保障してほしいなというふうに思っています。
In regards to the governmental policy, first, of course, the policy was first decontamination, then return the citizens, and then work on the recovery. However, this was done in a very unilateral way. It meant that even those people who perhaps did not want to live in a situation or live in Fukushima because of what they perceived as the risks, there was no support given for these people. And so this policy for forced return was incredibly problematic, in my view. After the change in policy, and we are now seeing a return of people who are living in areas with up to 20 millisieverts. However, anywhere over 20 millisieverts is being designated as a place where people are not returned to. Although these standards have been put in place, in my perspective, this standard which has been put at 20 millisieverts is still too high. I believe we need to return to the original standard which was set at 1 millisievert and respect this in regards to how we were looking forward to this. And as well as this, not only the issue of the standard but also the issue of the right to choose is something which should be guaranteed. Those people who want to return the area should have the support for that, but those who do not want to return the area should also be supported for them to have that right also.
私も同じ意見ですが、重要なことはですね、日本でその白血病の労災この原発労働に起因するということで労災認定される時の基準は5ミリシーベルトです。で日本で20ミリシーベルトを超える被爆をしている原発労働者はこの事故の前にはほとんどいなかった。ほとんどの人が1ミリシーベルト内外です。そういう形で行われていたものがこの事故が起こった結果、一般市民が20ミリシーベルトまで被爆して良いというのは、その値が安全か危険かというレベル、そういう議論の前に社会的に見てですね、原発を推進してきた政府がそういうことを言うこと自身が、僕は法的にも常識的にも許されないことじゃないかというふうに思っています。
I'm of the basic same opinion as Ms. Mutoh, but one point to add in regards to this also. Until the accident, for example, when we look at the labor standards or the permissible doses for workers in nuclear power plants, for example, if we look at, for example, the designation of what a kind of exposure is the limit to be recognized for example, the occurrence of leukemia to be connected to exposure to radiation, according to the labor standards, 5 millisieverts. However, we're now seeing the situation where even for citizens, this permissible limit has been raised very highly. Before the disaster occurred, when we looked at the situation of the exposure to radiation of workers in nuclear power plants throughout Japan, before that there was barely any cases that you would ever hear of workers even being exposed to up to 20 millisieverts per hour. And in general, it was around per year. Around 1 millisievert was the general number, which was before the accident. However, now we are seeing the level set for general citizens to be 20 millisieverts. And this is something not only about the safe threshold or about the actual health risks, for example, of the radiation, but also in terms of a social and legal responsibility on behalf of the government which pursued the policies in support of nuclear power until now. And this is something as a community that we really need to bring to account.
Okay. It's 3 o'clock, but I'll take one more question. So.
Hello, excuse me, Jacob Edelman, Bloomberg News. Can you? I think these are both for the attorney. Can you explain the procedure, the legal procedure that you're pursuing here? What happened? What step was taken on September 3rd, and how is this step being taken tomorrow relate to that? Also, you mentioned you don't think the ice wall is actually going to be built. Why is that?
ありがとうございます。現状は、3人の、原告というか告訴人が、福島県警に対して刑事告訴を行った段階です。そして刑事告発を行った段階です。そして、明日はですね、それに6000人の人たちが加わるという状態です。でこれから起こることは、まず警察の捜査が進み、その後に検察の捜査が進んで、起訴かどうかを決めるという状態になります。それから、もう一つは、
So in regards to the situation of the steps which have been taken until now, so on September 3rd, this was taken by 3 plaintiffs who submitted a criminal complaint to the Fukushima Prefectural Police. And from there tomorrow, what we'll be submitting is the addition of a further 6,000 plaintiffs to this complaint, which is being brought. And the process from there, it will first go through an investigation on behalf of the police, and then from there, it will go to the prosecutors, and they will decide whether it will go forward to be actually prosecuted or not.
凍土壁の問題点についてはですね、凍土壁という技術が、このような状態の、その水を止めるために今まで使われた例がほとんどない。もちろんトンネル工事などの場合はあるんですが、少なくとも原発の汚染された水を止めるために使われた、例がなく、でこれから研究開発をすると言ってるんですね。でそういう、しかしスラリー壁とかそのクレイボールとかであれば、これは、コンベンショナルな技術で今までいくらでも例があるわけです。ですからもう一つ凍土というのは凍らせているわけで、電気を非常に使います。年間数十億円の電気代がかかるだろうと言われているんですが、その状態をずっと続けていくということそのものが、果たして可能なのか、適切なのかということについても非常に大きな疑問を感じます。同じような意見は、日本、世界中の専門家からも提起されていて、政府も検討すると言っていたんですが、残念ながら12月に出された新しい対策でも凍土壁の計画は変更されていません。
And in regards to the question on the planned frozen wall, one first point which is important to raise is that such technology has not actually been used in order to stop water in nuclear power plants or in any similar situations anywhere in the world. Frozen walls have been used, for example, to prevent water leakage in tunnel construction. However, on the scale of, and also being used in nuclear power plants, this is something which this technology has not been tested until now. And so what is being said now is that the government, or is rather saying that they will urgently develop this new technology. However, when we look at, for example, alternatives of slurry or clay walls, these are more conventional technologies, conventional methods, which have been tried in many examples in nuclear power plants around the world. The other concern in regards to the frozen wall is the economic perspective of this. In order to go forward with this, it would use huge amounts of electricity to maintain it as a frozen wall as such. It would entail the investment of billions of yen every year potentially. And so I question whether this is something which is actually feasible, which would actually be possible to maintain in that perspective. There are also many international experts who have given various perspectives, also saying alternatives or also concerns about the frozen wall proposal. And although the government said that they would consider these other proposals and alternatives given by experts, unfortunately in the plan which was put forward this December, there was no change in terms of the proposal for the frozen wall.
Okay, thank you very much.
一つだけすみません。 ただ一つだけ新しい対策が付け加わっていまして、施設の中をアスファルトの舗装をしてですね、地下水が浸透しにくくするという対策が新しく付け加わっています。それは一応言っておきます。
But one important point that was added in the new measures which were announced this December was that there would be a new asphalt layer which would be constructed within to prevent the further seepage of water. So that is one new measure which was added, just to mention finally.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was very interesting. I have a token of appreciation from the club, and this is for Ms. Mutoh, 1-year membership. And Mr. Kaido, thank you very much for coming today. Thank you.